Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along here this morning. We've got a really great programme lined up for you today. But before we begin, of course, there's always a little bit of housekeeping. So, fire alarm. If you hear the fire alarm, then make your way quickly and quietly, following all the exit signs through to reception and out the front where you came in, which is the meeting point. My understanding is that there are no fire alarms planned for this morning, so it would not be a drill. Toilets. Toilets are outside these doors and to the left, should you need to use the facilities. And please switch off the mobile phone or put it on silent, which would help our presenters greatly. And actually, I don't know where the designated smoking area is.
Reception, outside reception.
It's always just outside reception. Go outside, follow the signs. There'll be something there for everyone. Okay. So, who are we? It's a really good question. United Kingdom Society for Trenchless Technology, also, of course, affiliated with the International Society for Trenchless Technology. And we're lucky to have representatives on international standards committees. We work in collaboration with the wonderful Future Water Association, the Pipeline Industries Guild, and the Pipe Jacking Association. And we've got 8 wonderful patrons. So what do we do? Well, another good question. We have a fantastic annual awards and gala dinner, which I'm sure many of you have been to. Our last one was in Bristol in September, which was a huge success, a great evening and a great show. Every 2 years, of course, we have No Dig Live, so next September, get ready, it's coming. Then we do, of course, national awareness presentations, other technical sessions like today, the Masterclasses. We have a university outreach programme, and of course, we do regional road shows as well. So quite a lot. We pack in quite a lot in a short space of time. There's a lot of knowledge at our fingertips that's there for you to use. We have our website, which is on the cusp of being changed. We're very excited about it. This is a little sneak preview of what it's going to be. It's going to be really exciting. Maybe I shouldn't build that up too much. It's going to be great. Then, of course, we have a technical inquiry form on our website. So if anybody has a technical inquiry, they can just submit it there, and it'll go through to our technical team who will review it and send it out to the relevant members. We have an e-news that hopefully most of you all receive, and we have a fantastic resource of papers that you can search, international papers and conference papers, great resource. And of course, you can join us on social media. We're everywhere. So we're really looking forward today to this masterclass. Our first speaker this morning is Joe Parker, Director at Watershed Associates. Joe has been in the industry for quite a long time. It says here 40 years. I think she must be including the birthing pool for that, because I don't believe that. But she has been in the industry for a very long time, very knowledgeable person, and we're very fortunate that Jo actually works extremely actively on the UKSTT Council and helps us enormously and planned a lot of this today, along with her colleague there, Tom Sangster. So thank you very much for that, Jo. So Jo's going to be talking about the challenge of 15% leakage reduction. What can be done differently? Well, let's find out. I'd just like to welcome Jo Parker to the stage. Thank you. And you'll need this as well for the review. Let's clip that. Oh. Do I have to wear both? Because this makes it all on the
Right. Can you hear me? Try that. No. Try that. No. Alternatively, I can just shout, which might be easier. How about that? No? Yes? Right. Okay. So, the challenge of the next few years with leakage, I've carefully left out a percentage because different water companies have set different percentages. I'm also very aware that Ian is going to be following me, and I don't want to tread on his toes at all. That is, I think, going to require water companies to do some things differently. And when I thought about this presentation, I thought, well, okay, we've got to do things differently. How good are we at leading the field, doing things differently, inventing new developments, generally in the field of water and also in the field of leakage? And I thought of some of the things where, in my view, we have led the field. And I thought, well, I'll get your brains working, try and get a bit of interaction. So a few questions. Now, some of you may think you know the answer to this, but where was the first ever water flushed toilet, and who invented that? Come on, I'm sure you know. Well, actually, the interesting thing is, I did a bit of research on this. Now, I'm afraid I am relying on that really absolutely verifiable source of information, Wikipedia, but I have also seen this with my own eyes. The first water flush toilet, no, it wasn't with a cistern, it was actually an ingenious method using seawater, was in Skara in the Orkneys, which is a Stone Age Neolithic sort of village. And if you've never been there, it is amazing. It is a long time since I was there, but it's a complete village with everything built of stone. Tables, chairs, beds, and toilets built of stone, and fully flushing toilets. So even back in the Neolithic era, you could say we were leading the field in water-related activities. And moving a little bit further forward, does anyone know where the first large pumped water supply was, and roughly when? Well, no one wants to hazard a guess? Well, it was actually, again, according to the internet, and some of this actually came from an academic paper, so some of this is verifiable. It was in 1582, the water supply in London, and the pumps were located under London Bridge, the one that fell down, I think. But even then, leading the field. Moving forward, the first filtration plant to supply a whole town. No? It was Paisley. Notice I am talking about the UK, so, you know, and we've already had the Orkneys, and we've got north of the border again. 1804 in Paisley was the first filtration plant. And then one thing which is close to my heart, because I actually made a video about it for the Institution of Civil Engineers, the first slow sand filters. This is in the world, I would say. Well, they were in Surbiton in London in 1829. And although John Snow, the doctor, gets a lot of credit for sorting out that cholera was waterborne, actually, these slow sand filters were the thing that really proved it, because that provided a population that had treated water, and you had the next door population that got the water from the same location, from the River Thames. And therefore, John Snow had the populations that he could then prove with statistics that cholera was waterborne. So I like to think that actually an engineer provided the facility to prove that cholera was waterborne. And then another first, and you probably don't know this, but did you know that a UK company developed the first screw-down water tap? That was Gueston Crimes. And then the final one, I felt this was appropriate to trenchless technology and also leakage, even if it's not maybe the area of leakage we think of. But the first use of pressure grouting under an embankment dam was carried out in the UK in 1877. So, you know, we've done our fair share to move things forward in the field of water. And I feel that we've also, in leakage, led a lot of early developments. So that in the early 80s, we had the introduction of DMAs in the UK, which are now a widely used approach throughout the world, but they were first developed in the UK, and leak noise correlators. And this was an interesting one. The leak noise correlator wasn't patented until 1996. And there was actually quite a battle between the US and the UK. And the US, a US company tried to get a patent, but the UK was able to prove that they had filed the patent first. And so that is the patent that stands from Palmer Environmental. But I'm pleased to see several people from WRC, because I know they were active in developing the technology. And this is actually Bristol Water in 1981 with a very early leak noise correlator, which filled a whole van. So things have moved on somewhat. In 1998, correlating noise loggers were introduced, and that was quite interesting because I was involved in that when I was working with Wessex Water, trialling the approach and using them to identify leaks. And the UK has also been very active in moving forward some of the concepts that help quantify leakage and help identify leakage performance, for instance. You know, the development of the pressure versus losses equation, the Babe approach, performance measurement. All these things have developed not necessarily entirely from the UK, but with people from the UK very actively involved and contributing to these ideas. So the big question is, can we continue to be the leaders? And, you know, do we need to continue to be the leaders? Because sometimes being the first to introduce a new concept can actually bring risks, it can bring costs, and sometimes it's better to let someone else, if you like, go through the heartache and do the main development, and to be an early adopter maybe, but not the inventor of something. Well, I think there are some things, and again, and this is where I'm desperately hoping I'm not going to steal Ian's thunder. So if he glares at me, I'll know I've just covered something that he was going to cover in his presentation. But you know, if we look at leakage performance, yeah, we've not done badly. It's reduced. But if you look at the most recent time.
Joe, I have got that graph in my presentation.
Oh, right. Rats, I knew that. So I won't spend too much time looking at this, because I'm sure Ian will look at it. But also, you know, when you look at how we're doing now, okay, these are percentages, which we all know can sometimes be misleading, because, for instance, you've got Malta and Cyprus, who seem to have high percentages, but actually they have relatively low consumption. They've managed to get people to reduce their consumption. But you know, we're actually not doing that well if you look at percentages. Now, there are all sorts of reasons, and there's been some studies carried out by UKWEAR and other organisations to look at maybe more relevant performance measurements as to how we're doing. But certainly, as far as published material goes, we don't always come out that well, whatever the reality. And then I thought it'd be interesting to put this up, and again, I don't know if Ian will be putting this up, but you know, when you look at the water loss, the quantity of water lost from some water companies is huge. Okay, they do treat and distribute huge amounts of water, but that is still water that is lost having been abstracted and treated. So there does seem to be some reasons why the water industry will need to think afresh and work out new ways of doing things, particularly when, you know, some of these water companies here, they need to rise to the challenge as well. And when you haven't got much water lost and you've got to reduce that even further, you've really got to start trying to think of new ways of doing things, trying things you haven't done before. And I hope that we will look at some of these slightly different ways of approaching things today. If we look at the drivers, we've got, first of all, customer views. Now, partly because of the published material, graphs like the one I showed where we seem to be sort of only halfway down the list and not, you know, the best in Europe, let alone the world. Customers do have this view that there's a lot of water lost. CC Water has said, we continue to question whether water companies are doing enough to reduce leakage. And in a little bit more detail, this is what they publish. So they're not terribly happy. And then the National Infrastructure Assessment carried out by the NIC actually said that there was a 1 in 4 chance of severe drought, and that water companies should halve leakage by 2050. I've got some good news about that target, but I'll come back to that. And then finally, for water companies, there are good financial reasons why they need to think differently and make sure that they come up with new ideas and ways of meeting targets. Not least the fact that if they happen to miss their targets, and again, I hope I'm not stealing off what's thunder, but it can be very expensive. So there's certainly requirements to change there. And the industry is reacting. So first of all, Ofwat threw down a challenge of 15% when the guidance for the price review came through. And my understanding is, I haven't sat down and checked every water company, but I understand it's 17%. So there we are, an outperformance there on behalf of the whole industry. And certainly talking to water companies, then they are looking at doing things differently. They're putting in more extensive monitoring, types of monitoring that maybe they haven't used before, more noise loggers, more information coming out of the distribution and different ways of using that. Some companies are trying to involve customers more and making it easier for them to report and identify leaks. And they're using technology and moving towards the sort of a vision of a smart network by knowing better what's going inside, and some of that we'll hear today. But there's also been some focus on leakage, for instance, at the innovation festivals that Northumbrian organised, one in Newcastle earlier this year, and then the recent one in East Anglia, which was a joint Anglian and Northumbrian initiative, where they had, for instance, data hackathons for leakage data to try and find out more information from all that data that's collected. So those have been quite successful. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the UKWIR big question, which is one of a number of big questions. UKWIR tried to move from the rather sort of tactical approach to research to taking a longer view, where they identified longer term targets and how can they get to it. And some of those longer term targets, well, interesting enough, there was that CC Water saying we should halve leakage. Well, there's a long term target or a big question of how do we halve abstraction by 2050? And then related to that and related to today is how do we achieve zero leakage in 2050? Zero leakage. Now, I would say with both of those targets, maybe we'll get to them, maybe we won't. I think it's likely I won't be that worried in 2050, even if I am still here, whether we have actually got to zero leakage. But unless you really focus the mind and set yourself these stretch targets, then and start thinking, well, if we were setting that target, how could we achieve it? Then you won't make the jump and the new developments that are really needed. So the good news is I'm not going to go through this whole thing in detail. If anyone wants a copy, they can obtain a copy via the UKWIR website, www.ukwir.org.uk, and they can get one free of charge. But the programme lead for this big question, Jeremy Heath of SES Water, has actually developed a slightly different way of looking at leakage. We both agreed that one of the issues with leakage is that it always tends to, you go to a conference, and I have been to quite a number of leakage conferences over the last 15 years, both in this country and overseas, and there's huge numbers of papers on finding out where the leaks are. So that's the locate. So, a lot of effort on how do you locate these leaks. But of course, before you even start to locate them, you have to know that they're there, so there has to be an awareness. And actually, isn't a better way than finding the leaks and then having all the effort of having to repair them, wouldn't it be better to try and prevent them? And assuming that you have found them, I have always been amazed, and I have commented on this and sometimes been the only paper on the subject, there is never anything about mending them, about new ways of mending them, about making mending leaks more efficient. And it really does seem to be the poor relation of the whole process of this leakage management. And I think the acronym of PALM is quite a useful thing to remember of the different parts of trying to achieve zero leakage. So I'll whip through, and again, I won't spend too long, partly because the time's running out. But when we look at preventing, there is quite a lot on the UKWIR programme about preventing. Basically, new leaks on existing networks are minimised. Well, that's definitely all about preventing. And then the other side, which I'm quite passionate about, because I think this is ridiculous, we should not be doing this now. All new pipework is leak-free when laid and remains throughout its economic life. We can achieve this now, but we're not. If I move on, the awareness, there's quite a lot of the awareness is about being able to quantify leakage. So a lot of these projects, understanding the balance between use, supply pipe leakage, plumbing losses, and meter under registration. You know, you need to know, is it a leak? Is it use? Is it inside someone's house? A leaky loo? So that's awareness. And then locating, well, there is quite a bit on locating. So, and again, that overall topic, all new leaks are found quickly after they break out. So that's about locating. But repairs are quick, economic, with minimum disruption, and background leakage is eliminated. Well, yeah, which were the only two things which really relate to mending, and not an awful lot of information there. And that made me think of the way we currently repair leaks. And I was lucky enough to be probably one of the last tourists ever to go in the recent time to Palmyra in Syria, which is a fantastic Roman city, probably now in rather more ruins than it was when I went. I don't know if you can see here, but there are some pipes. And the system of pipes look remarkably like our system of pipes now. And my understanding is, I don't have any records of this, but Romans repaired the pipes in the same way that we repair now. They dug a hole and they either put in a new pipe or put something round the pipe to stop the leak. And funnily enough, whilst I was in Palmyra, and this was in 2007, I think, or 8, in the town next to it, there was someone repairing a pipe, probably using a very similar approach to the Romans. So I would just finish with that thought about saying, you know, all these areas of leakage, and this is particularly appropriate for UKSTT, please can people really put effort into thinking about how can they repair pipes in a more efficient way? Because that actually swallows up the bulk of the money in leakage management. So, thank you very much. I don't know, am I allowed to take questions? Or? Yes. Oh, any questions? Yes?
With the main link through new networks part, do you think, and this might be gone into the English competition, but do you think DMEX is going to make it even less likely that water companies will want to work really closely with new developers, etc., and try to improve new networks?
Well, I have to own up my, I'm biased here because I work as technical advisor under the Water Industry Registration Scheme for Lloyds. So I happen to be very much in favour of that. That is a robust quality management system, which, whilst not perfect, you know, you can check the competency of people, you can carry out quality audits, but you can't guarantee that if it's Friday afternoon and the guys want to get home and their target was to get a certain meterage in the ground or a certain number of service connections made, that they won't get them done in the quickest way possible, which might not be good quality. But at least it is a system that manages the work and identifies how it's being done and picks up issues. My beef is that water companies impose this approach on non-water company contracted work, but don't work to it the same procedures themselves. And in some water companies, they cannot say whether the work that their contractors do to install new mains is done to good quality or not. They actually have no way of checking, and finding leaks on polyethylene pipe is not easy, and although some water companies may be introducing greater checks on new developments, certainly some at the moment do not do that. And a pressure test doesn't necessarily bring to light issues at the time with the quality of workmanship. Although I'm aware I'm in the company of people who have far more knowledge about that than I do. So.
Can I ask a question, Jo?
Yeah.
I saw your graph earlier, which was comparing the different countries and their leakage rates. And I noticed that the Netherlands and Germany were at the bottom of that list, so they've got a better rate. So do you think it is that they have some potentially better options that are already out there that could help reduce leakage?
Well, with the Netherlands is the one I know well, so I can comment on that. And Acquia actually carried out a very detailed study, not sure how long ago it was, maybe 8-9 years ago, where they they asked exactly the same question. Why is the Netherlands leakage so low, and could we achieve that? What they found was that actually in the areas where they have similar conditions, so for instance in Suffolk and some parts of East Anglia where it's relatively flat, benign sandy soils, they actually have similar levels of leakage if you measure it in the same way. And this is why I pointed out that percentages can be very misleading. Because one of the issues that affects the amount of leakage in a percentage is pressure. And if you're in an area where there's a very large variation in topography, even with the most sort of careful design, bearing in mind you're working with existing systems most of the time, it is very difficult to minimize pressures compared with somewhere that's pan flat and you can just get the pressure down throughout the whole area. So it was pressure, it was sandy soils, and there are some practices that are good that I think I'd love to see, but they're not within the water company's remit really. For instance, a lot of new developments in the Netherlands have cycleways, and most of the water mains are laid in the cycleways in this nice sandy soil. So actually they're accessible. They don't have the access issues that water companies have, which means that even when they know there's a leak, they can't always get in and mend it as rapidly as they'd like to. Germany I can't comment on, and there's a bit of me. I do wonder, having seen the quality of work in Germany and knowing the sort of culture, whether this goes back more to the doing it right in the first place. And you know, there was a lot. There's been a lot of rebuilding in Germany, and you know, a lot of the networks are newer, so that may affect it as well. But these are just hazarding a guesses, and I may be totally wrong, and they may, that certainly in leakage procedures, they don't seem to do anything better than us, other than I think there's a sort of 100% metering there, which does make life easier when you're trying to work out, is it leakage or is it on the property? Feel free to disagree with me over coffee. I will be interested to hear people's comments.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you. Take it a little to me.
Oh.
Thank you very much. I found that absolutely fascinating. Going on from that, we're going to be discussing this in a little bit of a different angle. We've got Ian Pemberton, who's a chartered civil and water engineer with over 30 years' experience in the industry. And he joined Ofwat 4 years ago. And apparently he's recently joined the RAPID unit, which sounds like some kind of SAS thing. So really looking forward to finding out what his take on this is going to be. So please welcome Ian Pemberton. Thank you. maybe use this as well, both of them, if you don't mind. Can
Okay.
I just clip it onto?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you, can you hear me without a microphone? Should we do it that way? Can I just put that so it doesn't rattle away? Let's have a go here. You're very lucky to have me. Do you know what PERDA is? PERDA is the period during a run-up to a general election where we civil servants are not allowed to say anything that can be construed as being party political or to have any kind of preference or any kind of influence on in the forthcoming election. Basically, that says don't talk to anyone about anything. So a diktat came out, an email came out a couple of days ago saying anyone speaking at any conferences in the next week or so. I said, yeah, I'm planning to do this one for the UKSTT, and they said, well, you can't. I said, why not? It's crazy to close. So it's actually, can I have a look at your slides? Yeah, it's fine. And there was only two that they said might be straying into areas of contention. And I know you're desperate to know what those two are now, but I can't tell you. So what that does mean is that obviously it does give me an absolute brilliant excuse for not answering any of your questions at the end of it. So I can just plead the fifth on everything and anything you say. Please do ask. I will be honest, if I can answer, and if I can't, then please understand that during the election period, that's not something I'm able to do. And also, please excuse me when I'm looking into the sky, because I've obviously had to re-emphasize some of the things I wanted to say this morning on the basis of PERDA. This is the only slide that Joe and I are going to cross over on. Although I was scribbling away, and I really want to build on some of the points that she was saying. You can spot the problem, can't you? It's not, it's the thing that I'm going to, again in this environment, struggle to say is the rationale and reasons as to why that graph might have been flat for 20 years. All of the arguments that you can think of have probably got some validity and some truth in them, whether that's through customer perception, regulation, industry, financing, funding, asset health, all of those things. There's a gem of truth in everything there. So what I want to do today is really give a little bit of the right back up the value curve of who, off, what are, what we do, really importantly what we don't do, and just to give an indication of what happens during a price review, our thought processes, where our thought processes are in terms of the current price review, and really how that impacts on the people around this room, suppliers and water companies. We spent a bit of time on this one. Privatisation, 1989, and then the formation of Ofwat by the 1991 Water Industries Act. Our role is to protect customers. We're an economic regulator, which is a way of regulating quasi-monopolies. So what our powers and our function is to ensure that the water companies provide an appropriate level of service and are appropriately funded to meet their statutory and their license obligations. So our powers are all around the water companies, not through into the supply chain. We don't tell companies what to do. We tell them what must be achieved, but we don't tell them how they must achieve that. We would expect companies to have the management systems in place and the expertise to be able to do that themselves. Despite my colleagues on the switchboard, every single day No, sorry, that's a CCW. No, that's a matter for the civil courts. No, sorry, that's something you need to take up with you need to get legal advice on. Because we are the customer protectors of the customer, the assumption is that we're the first point of call for the customer. And that's not the case at all. So you've got CCW, environmental regulators, and the civil courts as well, who can deal with sort of other issues there. I think the two things in the middle there, which are quite important, there are powers under the Competition Act. So our main powers are under Water Industry Act 91, and then we've got some powers under the Competition Act, which are really around abuse of market dominance. So if anyone is acting in a sort of a cartel sort of way, that is things where we can do. And a really important one, which is a kind of it's a nudge towards the thinking of Ofwat, is our duties under the Water Act for 2014, which is now a duty to consider long-term resilience. And the resilience word is very, very prevalent in our thinking, and hopefully comes through in the price review. So what's a price review? You've all gone through these. As I graduated in '89, and straight through into AMP 1, and then put it. A 5-yearly setting of price limits for each of the licensed companies. The Ofwat term is appointees, those that are appointed by the Secretary of State to deliver water services under the Water Act. And we set the amount of money that the companies can return, that can receive from their customers. And we do it on a 5-yearly period because that obviously gives it an element of stability, and also it gives the companies some, it gives us a periodic chance to go and look at how the industry has changed, how society has changed, what the needs are, what the drivers are, and how we can push that forward. In 2014, for AMP 6, we introduced things called performance commitments and outcome delivery incentives. Ofwat and economic regulation, they love it. They love an acronym. Same as engineering. So the performance commitments are us asking the companies to understand what their customers want. This is what would happen if you were in a non-monopoly, non-quasi-monopoly supplier system. So you get a choice when you go into the supermarket whether you buy a Pepsi or a Coke or a lemonade. That's a market in operation. You get a choice as to whether you buy a petrol or a diesel. That's a market in operation. There's a difference with the regional water companies. So we're asking those companies to really operate in a space where they understand their customers, and to report what is important to their customers through performance commitments. And leakage and per capita consumption is one of what we call the common performance commitments. I'll come on to common and bespoke performance commitments in a second. The second element of that is an outcome delivery incentive. And that's basically, let's go on to that one. In the price review, we have set a benchmark as to the level of performance that we would expect companies to deliver. And it's stretching, so that's not a 50th percentile, that's a 75th percentile, the stretching commitment. So it's upper quartile. So to stand still, all of the companies need to be upper quartile performance. If you could exceed that, then with customer approval, we've allowed the amount of money you can return from the customer to increase. On the flip side of that, if you fail to deliver that, then we would expect the companies to be returning money to their customers. So it's a pain gain mechanism, but it's a pain gain around high performance. And I think that's something that we've, it's a move in the right direction. It's something I think the industry has struggled with for quite some years. One of my colleagues, an economist, has always said that the industry is regulated to a very high level, whether that's environmental regulation, drinking water standards, economic standards, and the companies are kind of just bumbling along above that bar. The bar is very high, don't get me wrong, it's very, very high, but there's been a massive disincentive to fall below it, the enforcement actions, but there's never really been the counter to outperform as well. And this mechanism is an attempt to try to redress that pain gain mechanism. I just want to go back to that one. Whoops. So as I said, there were 14 common performance commitments. All of the water undertakers have to commit to a performance level for that. And one of the things we can do during the price review is not only set the level of money that can be recovered from the customers. I really want to make that distinction. That's not the amount of money that the company can and has to spend. It's the amount that they can receive in income. They have got to achieve their regulatory and legal and statutory and moral obligations. They've got to spend with their investors what needs to be spent. The thing that we regulate is the amount that can be recovered back from customers. And two of those performance commitments are leakage and per capita consumption. But just from what we were just discussing there around, I'm just building up on one of Joe's points there around mending. Asset health is it's been new in 2014, but it's a strong common performance commitment now. So it's actually just being good at identifying something and solving the problem immediately when it happens is only part of the solution. Everything should be nice and calm. And I'll come on, one of my, the final slides in my talk is around thinking like a customer. And I would want to push that everyone around these tables thinks like customers. You are customers. We're all customers. And the chances are what we want from our companies is what the customers of our service also want as well. This is just published late last month, earlier in October, and it is it's a really interesting read. If you haven't already read it, please do. It's very cleverly written to not tell you how to do it, but it's to set some of the hairs running, to make you think. It's very, 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 very. You'll probably have to read it twice or three times to go, that was just, what did that mean? But on the second or third reading, you go, no, I get it. So it's all around that longer term thinking, systems thinking, customer thinking, joined up, collaborative working, long-term objectives, doing the right thing. And I really would commend you to have a quick read of that. And it's really setting the long-term objectives and thinking win-win. And this word collaboration comes across enormously. And again, that's something that during PERDA I probably have to say less than I would want to say about that in terms of the collaboration competition model. That's just, it's just not something I can really discuss today. And certainly the privatization versus nationalization debate is absolutely something I cannot discuss at all today. I think this is another big one for me. I got involved in leakage in '94. That's when managing leakage first came out, and it was down in consultants working in the West Country, and starting to think about establishing DMAs, getting loggers out there, getting data back, and I think that there's two elements of that. This is a slide I've used internally to bring some of the non-engineers up to speed in Ofwat as to what the leakage problem is, and I think outside of our room, outside of our expertise, people probably just think, well, you go along, you find the water trickling out the pipe, and you go and mend it, and then you say, why did that leak in the first place? But actually, what we're seeing with the leakage reduction, the leakage effort, the conversation we just had about the Netherlands and about Germany having much lower levels, there's definitions of leakage. There's ways to define it. There's ways to control it, and the difference between sort of leakage and unaccounted for water. Whether you go down the sort of ILI route and then start thinking about what's unavoidable annual losses, or whether you can actually calculate the right components of the water balance, is a huge issue. But the point I really wanted to get across through to my colleagues and to let you know that's what we're thinking about, is that the blue blocks are measured, real data. The green blocks are, it's real-time data. The green blocks are measured intermittently, as and when meter reads come in, and the rest. The orange blocks are done through statistical survey, and the net result of the rest of it is leakage. And two ways to look at the same problem would be, the better you can understand and quantify each of those components, the more that you will, the better it is for the water balance. Or putting that another way, the more you can put in the top boxes, the lower your leakage is. And I think the average customer probably doesn't realise how much of current leakage is not measured, how much of it is through statistical survey and long-term metering. And I think they're both two sides of the same coin. They're both two sides of the problem, and neither has to take precedent. We've got to get better at understanding the water balance, understanding the real losses, why we've got real losses, what's caused those, getting ahead of the curve on it, exactly as Joe says, getting better at mending them, and moving towards zero leakage by 2050. And if that gets to a point where the understanding and the definition of leakage evolves, then so be it. My work with RAPID. Anyone heard of RAPID? No, okay. It stands for the Regulatory Alliance for the Promotion of Infrastructure Development. Sounds like a force-fitted acronym to me. The gist of it is a joint venture between the Environment Agency, Ofwat, and the Drinking Water Inspectorate to say, why is the UK not solving long-term water resource problems? Why are we predicting there to be deficits in 2065? And that's not just engineering problems. The regulatory framework might be wrong, the incentives might be wrong, the investment cycles might be wrong, the relationship between sort of statute law and contract law might be wrong, the thinking might be wrong in terms of the investor's approach to risk. So there's all of those aspects are being looked at now through the RAPID unit. So obviously that we're looking at new resources, new trades, new transfers, but also why are they not happening? What are the blockers? And it's a 5-year program, 1 year funded to date, and there is a pot of money that each of the companies can put into. There's a gated process for promotion of schemes taken outside of the price review period. So and it's a step towards. Those who work for the water companies in the room will know that there's probably a different relationship with each of the regulators in different places, and there's regional good practice and places to improve. And one of the things about RAPID is to try and get that into a far more collaborative space. I got 3 slides here, which just really, I just wanted to whiz through. It's going to happen. Population growth is going to happen. Climate change is going to happen, and supply-demand deficit is going to happen. You know, we know where the problems are, and if you haven't, again, that's the UKWIA research into the long-term water resources planning framework, published in 2017, I think. Again, just read it if you can. It's a very, very intense document, but it does give a lot of information about the challenges we're facing. And as we move in towards this area of population growth, climate change, maybe longer, hotter, drier summers, and maybe even longer, drier decades, you know, as we move into much longer planning cycles. There's 2 components to that supply-demand balance, supply and demand. The RAPID unit is really looking at the supply side of that in terms of how can we make sure that there are sufficient amounts to do that. But very, very importantly in that document, and it's something that Ofwat really pushed UKWIA to put in, was a twin track approach. So that it's not just how we're going to get more water into supply, it's how we're going to manage demand as well. And by demand, I also mean leakage. So leakage is a major component. Society change, customer expectations change. If you think about the attitudes towards environment, maybe even 20, 30 years ago, customers are a bit more savvy now, aren't they? Customers are a bit more with it, and there's an expectation that we as an industry should be reflecting that. And I think one of the reflections there is the moving away from the economic level of leakage. You know, it was a great target to get to, whilst we had to get the initial leakage levels down. Realistically now, we know that environmentally that actually we need to do the right thing rather than try to set an arbitrary economic target somewhere down the line. And we set the target, you know, 15% reduction in this AMP minimum, and a move towards zero leakage by 2050. So we know where the glide path is, you know. And this is what I'm saying about the longer term investment thing is you can focus on the 15 or you can focus on the 50. And within the current regulatory regime, there is mechanisms to think longer term and to make longer term returns. Yeah. So the things like CapEx bias. Anyone ever says CapEx to you, you can give them a slap from me, because CapEx is gone. It's TOTEX now. It's the total expenditure that's important. You know, the fact that and how that is invested through entirely separate presentation on what's called RCV, and RCV rundown, regulated capital value, goes into a separate pot. It's basically like a lease purchase scheme, but that the investors can make very long-term, steady returns from investing today. So the mechanisms are in place to facilitate long-term investment now. I heard a statistic from the Environment Agency this week, or last week. If you extended the worst case scenario for climate change and population growth across the whole of the UK, every single water resource zone would be in deficit by 2065. Every single one. Now, if you extended that, that's a big top end of. So you would be then saying the worst case scenario of climate change and the worst case scenario of population growth happened in Cumbria, as it does in Brighton, as it does in Exeter, or Sunderland. So it's a big if, but it's a national problem, and it's one that I think we collectively need to get together and solve. And I think the reason I put that slide up was basically to say, well, we can't solve supply-demand balance by just providing more supply. It is a real measure of the twin track approach. So if you look at the components of the supply-demand deficit, it is very balanced. I'll give an anecdote. I'm currently enrolled on a circular economy masterclass that being run by SciWem, and they had a case study of a large food manufacturer who said their attempts to move to a circular economy. Circular economy is cradle to cradle, so if you're going to put your yogurt in a plastic pot, you're working out what's going to happen with that plastic pot at the end of life. Preferably, it would go on to become used as a plant pot or something else. It has a second life rather than just being recycled. And this particular food manufacturer, I said, they'd made great strides in towards circular economy within their supply chain. And I said, well, yeah, okay, fantastic. So what you're doing is brilliant. How is that translated and related into the other large multinational food suppliers? And your man laughed. He said, oh, we spoke to them and they said they can't learn anything from us. It was just like you're not going to get it, unless you're collaborating at the top level, unless there is a meeting of minds at top level, then it's never going to get there. The collaboration can happen in this level, but ultimately, if a good technique works in one region, what I would want as a regulator is for that good technique to be translated across the whole of the UK. Commercially, absolutely fine. I'm not saying do it for free, but if there's pockets of excellence, let's make sure they're being shared. Let's make sure that they're being built upon, and that and the maximum number of customers can benefit from it. I think the other thing I just really want to say there is around putting that customer at the heart of everything we do, which would be my mantra from this talk, is think what you'd want. What do you want from your water company, from your supplier, from your supply chain? Just a couple more slides, I think. in simple terms, I don't think innovation is necessarily just technology. It can be, but it's not just technology. Innovation is in learning from other sectors, learning from other countries, and thinking differently, and being allowed to think differently, to have that sort of free electron, that free space to do that, and to be efficient in the thinking. The number of times I've spoken or attended at conferences and people have said, I can't get that data from with my own organization. And as a regulator, you say, well, I'm managing your chief exec and your executive company, and you're being funded to be efficient. And if you're telling me, the regulator, that your company's inefficient, why the hell can you not tell that internally? Why can't you break down that inefficiency in your organization? And to try and get that thinking like a customer from some companies are really good at it, for getting that golden thread all the way through from the chief exec down to the operatives, and some are elsewhere on the journey, shall we say. So my last slide is really just building on what I've just said there. Think like a customer. Think like what relationship do you want with your water company? Do you want them to be in your street digging up at 3 o'clock in the morning because they'd realised there was a burst at 2:55? Or do you want them to be ahead of the curve and to have prevented that burst in the first place? Or do you want them to be working effectively on the next one so that they can come at 8 o'clock in the morning and repair that? What would work for you? Think systems as well. Systems thinking much wider, much wider than just leakage. What are the leakage benefits? The so what? Like Joe was saying earlier on, around we're getting really good at identifying leaks when they occur, and probably not as good at getting in and repairing them quite quickly. Maybe there's some external factors around that. Maybe they're red routes. Maybe they're the underneath motorways or A roads or outside hospitals, whatever it is. But that risk is foreseeable. Think systems. And long-term solutions, I can't really stress that one enough, is this problem, supply-demand balance, leakage, per capita consumption, it's not going away. It's 15% is just a line on the graph. We know which way the graph is going. It might go slightly faster or slower from PR24 onwards. It might, but we know where it's going. It's not going to go anywhere different. And then really just around cleverer ways of working, innovation in the supply chain, how you interact with your suppliers, how you interact with each other, how you share those technologies, how you can and do good business through it. I'm not talking about just giving away intellectual rights and intellectual property, but actually, the solutions are in this room. Thank you very much for your time. Am I on time? Anyone got any questions for me to avoid?
My name's Robin Bell from Informatics.
Hi.
Do you think by focusing on reducing customer bills, we're devaluing water generally, and also putting many of the utilities under huge pressure to do more with less? I'm sure this isn't a new question, but it comes up regularly in my discussions with our customers.
Oh, my word. I've got this purder in the back of my head going, don't answer that. A very generic answer would be it's a balance, isn't it? It's a balancing act of them all. Customer affordability is a huge issue for Ofwat. You know, I forget the statistic, but it's a huge number who are in water poverty, and also vulnerability is not a static event. Each of us in this room could become a vulnerable customer for a period of time, and the expectation is that the relationship between customer and company is sufficiently good that the customer can say, and the company has got mechanisms in place to make that more affordable. Yeah, Perda just stopped me saying that one. I apologise, but yeah, hopefully that gives you some kind of answer. Hi, Bob.
Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson, which one's best? I was wondering a bit about, and it may be that I should know this, it's often the case, and I don't. Have we ever considered national targets around some of the key measures, say leakage? So, in a world where we're trying to balance competition, collaboration, has that ever cropped up?
Yep, it's certainly in current thinking. And there was an Ofwat internal conference when one of the senior directors stood up and said that, and everyone went, "Ooh!" So yeah, it's definitely a yes. I think yeah. Watch this space, I would say. Yeah.
It's an observation because I know you can't comment, but just that it's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult to make people make long-term investments, as you suggest, if possible, if you have the potential in the future of nationalisation. I don't know how you go about ensuring that the framework is correct for those competing positions. As I say, I don't expect you to comment.
I don't think I can. I don't think I can say anything on that. In the probably post-Perda, I can't say anything on that. But yeah.
But you can see it must be it's going to be a huge challenge.
I mean, I think there are mechanisms both ways that can be used, but yeah, it's not an area I can really get into today.
Perhaps help, actually, from just in so much as, because given an answer you perhaps couldn't give, so I'm Chief Engineer 710, and I can honestly say the debate about nationalisation or not hasn't made one jot of difference about our decision making around investment for us.
But it might be for your investment.
Yeah, which in turn, if that were the case, would put pressure through our exec, which would change it. All I'm saying is, in our exec rooms, make a decision. It hasn't. Who knows what might happen in the future? It hasn't made one bit of difference yet.
Absolutely. Are you thinking long term enough? So is that the fact that maybe that your timescales are shorter, and that they're shorter than perhaps people would like to see?
Well, I think that's always the debate, isn't it? Are we invest over we like to think we've got the balance, the right balance in the long term, but there's always a debate about is there enough long-term investment. I think that's that balance that we're talking. I suppose I just wanted to get into the room that if folks are thinking, right now, people are thinking, it's not. I just wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Good. Right. Oh, another one.
Stuart Troll. You said something along the lines that the more we can account for water, the lower the level of leakage. And you had a slide that showed the components of distribution input. That's the space that I'm working in at the moment, and we're finding that a lot of what is reported as leakage isn't leakage.
Yeah.
But then when we take that evidence to the water company and to their assurance providers, they say, oh no, that's not acceptable, that's not real leakage that you reduced there. So is there a lack of consistency between the assessors working for the different companies since the June return was stopped in 2011?
Cool. That's a question. I think the recently published consistent reporting guidelines are a step in the right direction. I was kind of on that working group. It came to it quite late actually, and it's quite surprising. I think the customer, you know, would be quite surprised that we as an industry have differences of opinion as to how we define leakage. You know, so I think there is a difference between leakage and unaccounted for water, my personal view, and you know, that is a journey, and in some ways we've made a rod for our own backs by putting unaccounted for water and leakage in the same basket, so that when people like yourself find things, it is seen as accounting magic. You know, and you know, and that we need to get over that. You know, I'm not sure I've got the answer in one question, you know, standing here today. But yeah, I acknowledge what you're saying. Great, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
That was really fascinating. Now start with our Renee today. I have to say, I thought John was King of the North, so thanks, Joe. I'll look that up on Wikipedia later. And thank you very much. I also didn't realise that the water resource long-term planning was so exciting. I was going to wait for the film, but I'm going to go and get myself a copy. And in the meantime, I'm sure you've got lots of questions for Ian and Joe. Maybe let them get their tea or coffee first, but we're going to reconvene here at 10 past the hour. So we've got a 20-minute break. Okay, thanks everyone.